Let's make it happen. Let's put the onus on government. Let's put the burden on government, not on businesses. And then secondly, if we need more adjudication in that regard, let's see how it pans out.
My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am very much in support of the Prove It Act and am proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill. The Regulatory Flexibility Act, or RFA, seeks to reduce the economic impact of agency regulation on small businesses. When proposed rules are found to have a significant impact on small businesses, the agency promulgating the rule must conduct an initial and final regulatory flexibility analysis. Unfortunately, this requirement is largely ignored on only half completed by the agencies. For example, a report from the National Federation of Independent Businesses found that in 75% of rulemakings, the SBA determined that federal agencies either ignored costs on small business or underestimated the regulations cost. Let me provide an ongoing example of this issue and how the Prove It Act would remedy the situation. Currently, we are opposing an Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS, proposed rule which would mandate the electronic surveillance of our nation's herds of cattle and bison. APHIS completed a brief two-page initial RFA analysis which found that using the Small Business Administration's guidelines, that the majority of cattle operations in the United States are considered small. So in fact, this regulation would fall directly on them. After acknowledging that the proposed rule would almost entirely impact small businesses, the agency then wrote off these concerns with outdated and incorrect data. This entire analysis spans just 2 pages, is from nearly 2 years ago, and relies on the undervalued cost estimate of the proposed rule created by APHIS, an estimate which APHIS has not publicly shown how it was calculated. Just to give you an example of how important this particular issue is to our cattle and bison producers, in 2013, APHIS estimated that an RFID requirement would cost between $1.2 and $1.9 billion, primarily against our small cattle producers. In 2019, they estimated that the cost would be $35 million, and they did so by ignoring the vast majority of costs associated with implementing an RFID mandate. And in 2024, they've reduced that number even further, down to $26 million, again by ignoring almost all of the costs associated with implementing an RFID mandate. This is what these agencies do. When they do their analysis, they do everything in their power to try to underestimate the costs that are actually going to be borne by the regulated community. If APHIS's rule was finalized, it appears that APHIS would be on track to try to get around the final analysis requirements that it is currently required to comply with, and impose one of the most costly regulations against our cattle and bison producers in the history of the United States, all while ignoring their responsibility to report these details and actually provide a valid economic analysis. It would also give a voice. Under the Prove It Act, the reasonably foreseeable indirect cost analysis would have forced the agency to consider the additional cost burdens it is currently ignoring under this rule, such as the cost of the wands. Right now, the $26 million is just strictly the button in the ear. It does not include all of the related computer equipment, all of the wands, the retrofitting for our livestock producers that would be necessary to implement this rule. That's how they come up with $26 million versus the $1.2 billion that they estimated 11 years ago. APHIS, if they had to comply with the Prove It Act, they would actually have to disclose the impact on the entire country through such mandate on our food producers. It would also give a voice to the ranchers and organizations which represent them to point out the obvious flaws in APHIS's proposal, flaws which myself and other ranching groups have been petitioning with OIRA. The shortcomings in the proposal stem from the agency's lack of industry expertise and create a real challenge, would be challenged under the Prove It Act's empowering of small businesses to challenge the findings in the initial regulatory flexibility analysis. It should not have to be this way, and agencies must be held accountable for violating federal law to the detriment of America's small businesses. The Prove It Act merely updates and strengthens a law already on the books to the benefit of America's small businesses. I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation. I think it's extremely important to be protecting our small businesses from regulatory and federal overreach. The question of how much extra work it would be for these agencies to have to comply, my response to that is then perhaps they would be a bit more judicious in their efforts to overregulate our small businesses and in fact, all of our businesses. Perhaps they would use their resources better in actually adopting regulations that were necessary rather than simply doing what they do now, which is overregulating every business and industry in the country. So I encourage my colleagues to vote in favor of this incredibly important bill.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, and I also thank my colleague from Texas for trying to do the right thing for small businesses. But if I can, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, if I may, sir. Office of Advocacy at the Small Business Administration. You would essentially put one person in charge of the operation. This agency is not just about small businesses. It could also be used by large businesses. Large businesses have lobbyists, have trade organizations that represent them. Small businesses like the ones on Main Street in your district as well as mine don't have major representation. They're just interested in essentially making payroll on a week-to-week basis. So I'm trying to figure out, under your legislation, are we going to have the same treatment of the small and large businesses, especially if the large businesses begin to challenge regulations that the small ones cannot?
Well, Mr. Correa, great question, because presently, because of the nature and the difference of the size and the resources between big corporations and small, presently, you see already big corporations with lobbyists that line these halls that have the ability to get in front of regulations before they come into place. Small businesses do not have that ability. They do not have those resources, yet they have to bear the same or equal and frankly disproportionate burden as a result of those regulations when they come out. So this evens the playing field and gives small businesses the same voice at the table that large businesses already have in DC.
Thank you, and support your intent. I'm just concerned that this actually does the opposite, because what you've got is you already have, if you would say, level playing field when it comes to resources. The level playing field, of course, does not exist. This does nothing to change in terms of who's there to advocate for the small businesses and to the large corporations. And the fact that you're essentially bottling up a lot of the regulations and not giving the small businesses the ability to work in this area, yet the large guys will be able to work in this area, I think actually will create an even worse playing level field, so to speak, or uneven playing field. Your thoughts?
I just simply disagree with the gentleman from California. This actually provides the ability for small businesses to go to the Office of Chief Counsel and say in a relatively easy way, present their case and say, look, you haven't done your job here, and there is a significant impact to a substantial number of small entities as a result of this proposed regulation, and you need to do your due diligence and let us know what that impact is going to be.
And I like that about your legislation. The problem is you put a single person in charge of the Office of Advocacy, which means you've essentially created a bottleneck. So your right to go and petition is really meaningless since you don't really have a way to petition.
Well, they do, and there is a prima facie review. So if there's no basis for the petition, of course, the Chief Counsel can make pretty good and pretty quick disposition of that, and then simply move those that have a substantial basis for their petition and move on to a larger hearing. So it does provide access to our system.
No, go ahead, finish.
I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm done.
I'm just going to say,